What's going on, guys? Welcome to another UFC fight card breakdown and predictions video. This time for UFC 302, Makhachev versus Poirier. I always get excited for pay-per-views because all the boys get together. We have an absolute blast watching these fights. So I'm super excited for Saturday. Now, in terms of our success over the past couple of events, we went 9-3 on back-to-back fight nights. So 18-6 over our past two events, which is a 75% success rate in terms of correct picks. So hopefully we can continue that trend into UFC 302 this weekend. But unfortunately, since starting my YouTube channel, I haven't found the most success during pay-per-views in terms of predictions. So hopefully we can break out of that slump for pay-per-views and ride the success that we've been having over the past two events. Now let's get right into it. I'm super excited. We had a week off, so I'm having withdrawals from watching fights, which I'm sure many of us are having. So let's just get into these breakdowns. And we start off with Raposo taking on Andre Lima. Now, this is Andre Lima's third scheduled opponent for this event. I believe he was supposed to fight Sun Young Park, I believe is the name. I don't want to butcher it. Let me see. Hyun Sung Park. Yeah, he got a knee injury, so he withdrew. And then some crazy named fighter that I've never heard before stepped in. Niam Jargal Tumendembarrel. I probably butchered it, but that's close enough. He had to withdraw due to visa issues. So another last-minute replacement. In comes Raposo to take on Andre Lima. Now, we've seen a couple of super short notice fights over the past couple of events. We had Chris Padilla taking on James Lontop in like 3 or 4 days notice, and then in a couple weeks ago in the last event we had Tuco Tokos going up against Umar C on like 3 or 4 days notice, and there was two different outcomes. In the Padilla fight, he ended up winning even though it was short notice, and last week Tokos ended up losing, and he was the short notice fighter. So we've had kind of a mixed bag of results for extremely short notice fights. Raposo did take this on short notice, but had about like a week and a half, I think almost 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, since he's filled in. So he has had a little bit more than the previous short notice fighters. Obviously not an ideal amount for a training camp, but I am going to be going with Andre Lima in this fight. I was taking a look at film from Raposo, and I actually think the kid has a great amount, like he has a great skill set for the UFC. It's just, I don't think this is the exact spot that he's going to find success in the promotion. I think he's only 25 years old, as Andre Lima is, but I think Raposo, with his abilities, with his skills, I think he can have a decent career in the UFC. I just don't think the winning starts on Saturday night for him. Now, the reason I say that is he is 9-1. He has lost 2 fights. One was on the Ultimate Fighter, so it's an exhibition, so it doesn't actually count on his pro record. But he has a 9-1 pro record, and if you look at his opponents, it's kind of an inflated record. If I don't want to shit on the guy, but his debut 0-3 fighter, so that's not too bad because it's his first professional fight. The second fight 5-14, 3-3, 1-3, 4-3, and then he goes on the Ultimate Fighter. He loses to Ludovic Sholinian, who ended up getting into the UFC, and he lost that by unanimous decision. I think at that time he's like 22 years old, something like that. And then after that, he ends up fighting on the Contender Series against Jake Hadley, where once again he loses by second round submission. Jake Hadley, decent prospect at the time, 7-0. He hasn't had the most success in the UFC, but regardless, a step up in competition that he wasn't able to handle. Then he goes on and fights a 3-2, 7-4, 2-0, and his most recent opponent, 4-2. So his wins aren't against like super high level opponents, but he is doing what he has to do on the regional scene to get himself noticed and to get into the promotion, which is winning. The problem is every time in his career that he's had that step up in competition, he's fallen short. So maybe there's a different story that plays out at UFC 302 for him, but I just haven't seen him find much success at that next level. And I think Andre Lima, also 25 years old, super young. I think both of these guys are going to have decent UFC careers. I just think Lima ends up with the win. I think he has better striking on the feet, even though, like I said, I really like Raposo's skill set. He has fast hands, he has good striking, and he has well-timed explosive takedowns, which I have seen in his previous fights. He ducks under shots well, and he powers through those takedowns, which he will find success in against Andre Lima. We saw Andre Lima in his most recent fight against Severino kind of struggle with that takedown defense, so I think Raposo should look to wrestle here. If it remains on the feet, I think Lima is the more calculated, he's the sharper striker, and I think he's going to end up winning this fight. Raposo's going to give him a good bout. I have no doubt in my mind that this is going to be a good scrap. I just think Raposo ends up falling short, but that's okay because he finally made it to the UFC, and we'll see him in the octagon again. So give me Andre Lima in this matchup. Let's move on to the next one. Next up, we have a women's bantamweight fight. Ailin Perez going up against Jocelyn Edwards, and I think I haven't checked the odds on my own. I have watched other analysts break down these fights, and I'm pretty sure Perez is a huge favorite. I could be wrong, but honestly, this is kind of like, this should be more of a closer line in my opinion. Both of these women have the ability to defeat each other, but I think Perez ends up taking this solely with the wrestling. I think Perez has she does a really good job taking her opponents down, controlling them on the ground, and inflicting damage with ground and pound. So there's a lot of fighters, obviously, that we know that'll wrestle, and they're going to just control, try not to lose position, but don't really do much on the mat. And we know that the judges don't really like that. But when there's a fighter that likes to use that wrestling, but also inflicts damage on the mat, the judges like that. They want to see damage, and Perez she does that very well in her fights. We saw her fight against Lucy Pudilova. She absolutely dominated over the first 2 rounds, but she ended up gassing and got creamed in that 3rd round. So that's obviously not a good look. But then I don't think Jocelyn Edwards is going to, Edwards also has cardio issues, kind of. You see her slow down in her fights. In her most recent fight against Nora Cornole, however you want to say it, she ended up slowing down as well. So she was the one implementing the wrestling in that fight, and she was noticeably slowing down throughout that fight. So if wrestling is what affects her cardio a lot, we know Jocelyn Edwards is probably going to be the better striker in this specific matchup, but she's going to tire as Perez implements that wrestling. Perez also will tire, but I think that Perez is going to take the first 2 rounds. She's going to find those takedowns. She might even be able to, because what Perez likes to do is throw heavy on the feet to try to kind of distract her opponent and then go in for those takedowns, which she does a good job doing. So I think she's going to back up Edwards. Edwards, like I said, definitely going to be the better striker in this matchup, but I think ultimately it's going to come down to Perez being able to find those takedowns, inflicting solid damage during those sequences, like the ground and pound and whatnot. And even if she does end up tiring like she did in that Pudilova fight in her last time out, I think Edwards is going to be feeling the effects of that, of the wrestling, and also get tired, which isn't going to allow her to maybe finish or do what Pudilova did to Perez in Perez's last fight. So apparently these two have already fought outside of the cage, I'm hearing people talk about. So it's going to be interesting to see how these ladies control their emotions in the octagon, but ultimately I am going to go with Perez getting those takedowns, inflicting some good damage on the mat. Now, in terms of a finish, I actually can see Perez maybe getting like a TKO victory here later on, maybe in the second, something like that, with ground and pound. But Jocelyn Edwards has 7 fights in the UFC. She's never finished anybody and never been finished. So she's gone to the judges' scorecards all 7 times. On the Perez side, she got submitted in her debut against Stephanie Egger, but then in her last 2 victories, Ashley Evans-Smith, I believe, is one. And in her last time out, Lucy Pudilova. I just want to double check. Yes. She won a unanimous decision in both of those. So it is safe to say whichever side you're on, you could play like them by decision as well. If you're picking Edwards, I believe she's a big enough underdog where you can just take her money line just in case Perez ends up gassing out or whatever. But I think either of these ladies, whichever side you're on, I think it's a safe play to go them by decision. I actually will take Perez by decision. So let's move on. Next up, we got a welterweight bout. Mickey Gall going up against Basil Haffez, and I'm not going to spend too much time here I'm going to be picking Basil Haffez to defeat Mickey Gall. Mickey Gall hasn't been in the octagon for 2 years now, I believe. Last time out was April 2022, so it was just over 2 years ago. He got finished in the first round by Mike Malott. So Mickey Gall, you guys see 7-5. There's people that are having incredible records on the regional scene that still haven't had their shot in the UFC, but we have somebody like Mickey Gall who is still in the UFC with a 7-5 record. Now, the interesting thing about Gall is there's a lot of fighters that end up getting into the UFC. They have an opportunity to find success on the regional scene and kind of get some experience under their belt. Mickey Gall started off in the UFC 1-0. His second professional fight was in the UFC, so he's 6-5 in the UFC. But his losses aren't like they're tough opponents. Like he lost to Randy Brown, Diego Sanchez back in 2019, which is still a good version of Diego Sanchez, Mike Perry, Alex Morono, Mike Malott. Like, these are tough opponents that probably give Basil Haffez a lot of problems as well. So I can't hate on him too much for his bad record. It's just interesting that he still has that he's still employed by the UFC. I think the UFC really liked what they saw out of Haffez in that JDM fight. He didn't quit. He took it on short notice, and he gave Jack Della Maddalena a hell of a fight. And I think they like his exciting style. I think they like the fact that... Oh, well, an advertisement just popped up on UFC, on Tapology. Sorry about that. I don't even know if you guys were able to hear it. Regardless, where was I? Basil Haffez. I think the UFC likes that he doesn't quit. I think they like that he goes in there to finish his fights. So I think they're just setting him up for success here. I'm going to go with Basil Haffez to defeat Mickey Gall, and we are going to move on to the next fight. Next up, we got a welterweight bout, another welterweight bout. It's Niko Price going up against Alex Morono. Now, I've been trying to avoid not listening to my gut. So when I have this weird feeling about a specific matchup, I kind of go with my gut, because I've noticed in the past I had a feeling about a fighter, but I'm like, oh no, you don't know what you're talking about. He's not going to win. And then I go pick the other guy, and then the person I originally thought wins ends up winning. So I don't want to backtrack from my thoughts. I don't want to backtrack from the gut feelings that I get. And for some reason, I have this nagging feeling that Niko Price is going to defeat Alex Morono. Now, I know that sounds silly because Morono is the better fighter, and typically when you're making breakdowns and predictions, you should pick the better fighter. Morono is better basically everywhere in terms of skill, but in terms of being a dog and fighting for your money, Niko Price has Morono beat. These two have already fought before. I believe it was like 6 or 7 years ago, and it's going to show up as a no contest on the records because Niko Price was caught with marijuana in his system. So stupid. Anyway, Niko Price ended up knocking out Morono at the end of that second round. But in that first round, Morono was able to drop Price a couple of times. But like I said, Niko is a junkyard dog. He's going to push forward. He's really not going to care about what comes his way. And unfortunately, he doesn't really have a good enough chin for that kind of a style. We've seen him get dropped and finished multiple times in the UFC. So it's going to be scary going with Niko Price here. But in terms of somebody that's going to just give you that grit, give you that like just constant pressure and fighting for your dollar, that's going to be Niko Price in this matchup. He's already defeated Alex Morono before. I understand they're at a completely different point in their career from 7 years ago. But I still think he's going to be able to just push the pace forward. I think he hasn't been in the octagon for like about a year, and he's coming off of back-to-back KO losses, one to Robbie Lawler in 40 seconds, and the one before that was to Phil Rowe, who he almost knocked out in that fight. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Niko does in this matchup. Morono hasn't really been too impressive, in my opinion, in his past couple of fights. I picked Buckley to defeat Morono in their fight. Buckley ended up doing that. He did it with relative ease, in my opinion. And then in his last fight, Morono went up against Court McGee, who he was supposed to run through in terms of the odds makers and how he was a huge favorite. And Court McGee, even at that point in his career, UFC vet, of course, but he gave him trouble in those 15 minutes. So I haven't been too impressed with Morono. It's a quick turnaround for him. It's like 2 months or something like that. So that's going to be interesting to see how these two overcome the kind of adversity, I guess, from their past couple of fights. Short notice on the Morono side, or sorry, not short notice, but quick turnaround on the Morono side. Nico Price coming off of back-to-back KO losses. Now, like I said, I should be picking Morono here. He is the better fighter. If the fight gets to the mat, Morono's got better jiu-jitsu. Price does have decent wrestling, but I think he should just avoid that at all costs because that pressure and the volume that he brings on the feet, I think he's going to find success like he did in the second round of their previous fight. So I'm just going to stick to my guns, go with Nico Price here to just dog it out and get that win over Morono. Yeah, so I'm going to go with Nico Price in this matchup. I believe he's the underdog. So, picking a dog here. Next up, another welterweight fight. We got 3 welterweight fights in a row. We got Phil Rowe going up against Jake Matthews, and I'm going to be picking another underdog in this matchup in Phil Rowe. When I was looking at these matchups, I initially went with Jake Matthews. I like Jake Matthews' boxing. He actually put up a really good fight against a top Brazilian prospect in Michael Morales in their last fight. I'm pretty sure that's who he fought last. Yep. And he ended up losing that as a unanimous decision, but he put up a really good fight in that matchup. He's got good, solid boxing. He's got good hands, and he can implement wrestling in his fights as well, which is going to be good against somebody such as Phil Rowe, who has that long, rangy style and is going to be able to take advantage of Jake Matthews in this big octagon. But to find his success on the feet, he's going to need to get in the pocket and use that boxing. The problem is Phil Rowe does a good job with movement. He does a good job keeping his opponents at range. And that's going to be detrimental to Jake Matthews, but it's going to be Phil Rowe's going to find a lot of success if he ends up sticking with that game plan. Now, we saw him finding success against Neil Magny his last time out with that exact game plan, but a lapse of IQ, a lapse of judgment, whatever you want to call it, this guy ends up entertaining the clinching scenarios with Neil Magny that ultimately cost him that fight. It was a close fight, split decision, but regardless, if he just stayed on the outside and continued to pop his shots at Neil Magny, he would have won that fight. And hopefully he sticks with that game plan here, because if he just uses the kicks to keep Jake Matthews at bay, uses the jab nicely, I think he's going to be able to point his way to a decision victory here and defeat Jake Matthews. Now, on the Jake Matthews side, he needs to get in, he needs to close that distance, use his boxing skills, and maybe even try to back Phil Rowe up against the fence, clinch him up, try to get a trip, try to get some takedowns, because I think he is the better wrestler in this matchup. So that's going to be the game. That's got to be the game plan for Jake Matthews. He cannot stay at range and play Phil Rowe's game, but I will be going with Phil Rowe. I think he keeps that distance. I think he uses kicks well, his jab well, and then ends up getting a unanimous, a decision victory. I'm going to say unanimous, but who knows with Phil Rowe. This guy's IQ scares me sometimes. But yeah, Phil Rowe is my pick for this matchup. Next up, we got a lightweight bout. Grant Dawson going up against Joe Solecki. Grant Dawson, huge favorite in this matchup, I believe, from what I'm hearing, and for good reason. I think he's literally just a better version of Joe Solecki. Like, maybe pure jiu-jitsu Solecki is going to be a little bit better, but I think that Grant Dawson is going to be better on the feet. I hope this doesn't stay on the feet as much, because we've seen Grant Dawson's chin get exposed by Bobby Green specifically. That Ricky Glenn fight that ended up being a draw. Who else? The Mark Madsen fight, I believe he got dropped in that. Maybe not dropped, but wobbled in that. I was going to say waddled. In the Mark Madsen fight, which isn't a good look considering Madsen's a wrestler. But yeah, both these guys coming off of KO losses. Grant Dawson has had more time to recover. I believe his Bobby Green fight was back in October, and Joe Solecki fought Drakkar Klose in December, if I'm not mistaken. But if we're going to talk about brutal KO, I believe the Solecki getting slammed off the canvas is more brutal than the one punch that Bobby Green landed on Dawson. Regardless, both of them are coming off of KO losses. Both need a bounce back here. Grant Dawson, like I said, I just think he's better anywhere the fight goes. I would just prefer that it doesn't stay on the feet, because I don't trust the guy's chin. Not that Joe Solecki has like fight-ending power. I think he only has one KO victory in his career. But I'd rather just Dawson shoot those takedowns early, Stay safe from those from the jiu-jitsu of Solecki. And like I said, I just think he's the better over, like, anywhere the fight goes. I think he's just a better version of Solecki. These are two very similar fighters, and I'll be picking Grant Dawson to be the victor at the end of the night. So moving on, we got C.Almeida going up against Roman Kopylov, and this is like the complete opposite of the previous matchup we just talked about. Dawson and Solecki are going to want to wrestle and grapple. That's what they want to do. These two are going to want to stand and bang. Both of them have a kickboxing background, and if you guys are unfamiliar with C.Almeida, which I'm sure you guys know who this is by now, this is the former Glory kickboxer that's fought Alex Pereira 3 times. I'm sure you guys have heard this a million times. He has a win over Alex Pereira. He's 1-2 against him in Glory Kickboxing. And going up against Roman Kopylov, another kickboxer. The guy wants to stand. He wants to strike. He has beautiful striking as well. Kicks, punches, whatever you want, this guy delivers. But he does have a combat sambo background, if I'm not mistaken. He just doesn't typically use it in the UFC. He wants to stand on the feet and he wants to strike with his opponents. And even though I think he is the better striker in this matchup, I know a lot of people are probably going to be like, you don't know what you're talking about. But either way, I think Kopylov is the better striker. And the reason why I want to say that is because C.Almeida, although he has fought better competition in kickboxing, having a fight where you know the opponent can't take you down, you can show your striking ability more than in a fight you have to worry about the takedown. So in kickboxing, you don't have to, all you have to focus on is defending, like dodging, slipping, and exchanging strikes. In the UFC, as we know, it's mixed martial arts. We already know this. You can't really go and do everything you want to do on the feet, throw those combos, throw those kicks, punches, whatever, because you have the threat of the takedown. And I think Kopylov will find some success if he decides to wrestle, but I think he is the faster, more explosive striker in this matchup. I haven't been, even though Almeida, I picked him to beat Dylan Budka as an underdog. I didn't believe in Budka's abilities. Budka and Kopylov are like night and day difference in terms of striking ability. I don't even know if Budka has striking ability, but I knew that Budka wasn't going to be able to solidify those takedowns. He was going to tire out and win that fight. I chose C.Almeida as the underdog. I think this was before I started breaking down videos on YouTube, so you guys can believe me with that pick or not. Doesn't matter, but I think the threat of the takedowns is what doesn't allow Almeida to really do what he did in kickboxing. So what I'm trying to say here is Kopylov will find some success with the takedowns. I think it'll pay dividends for him if he decides to try to take down Almeida throughout this fight. But if they end up this ends up being a striking match, I just think Kopylov's going to be faster. I think I've been really impressed with Kopylov's striking in the UFC. I know in his last fight he didn't really look too hot because he got mauled by Anthony Hernandez, but Fluffy's a great fighter, and I've been doubting him throughout his UFC career. It's just he continues to prove me wrong. Anthony Hernandez is like a complete opposite fighter to Almeida. So I don't think Almeida's going to come in here and ragdoll Kopylov. I think this is going to be mainly a striking fight. I think both are going to find success on the feet, but the difference is going to be Kopylov mixing in those takedowns if he chooses to do so. I don't know if anybody gets put away in this fight. But I am going to go with Kopylov to defeat Almeida here. Let's move on. Next up, we have another welterweight fight. I don't even know how many welterweight fights this is right now. I think it's 4. Yeah, 4 on this card. We got Randy Brown going up against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Now, this is tricky for me because Zaleski's an absolute dog. That 24-7-1 record is insane. We've seen he has that dog in him. In his last fight against Fakardinov, it ended up being a draw because early on Fakardinov knocked him down, was beaten on him, but then Zaleski just got better and better as the fight went on. The tables turned. It ended up being a draw at the end of the fight. So we know he's not going to be put away easily. We know he's going to keep coming forward. We know he's going to keep fighting. So that's the problem I'm having in this fight, because Randy Brown is like, it's not that he quits. I'm not saying he's like the opposite in that sense, but Randy Brown is more of like a technical fighter. He's going to stay on the outside. He's going to look to use a range similar to Phil Rowe. That's what he should do. Especially in this fight. I believe he has an 8-inch reach advantage, if I'm not mistaken. 73-inch reach for Zaleski, and we got 78. So it's not quite that much, but he has a 5-inch reach advantage and a 4-inch height advantage. So that length is going to be his best friend. I don't think he should look to brawl with Zaleski. I don't think he should get into a firefight. I think Randy's movement is going to be too much for Zaleski. I think he's going to do a good job moving around, landing his shots, his straights, his jabs. And then basically, it's just the thing that worries me is that Zaleski's not going anywhere. He's not easy to put away either. So Zaleski is going to be a popular pick this week, and I don't blame everybody for picking him, but I do think that Randy Brown's ability, his movement, his striking, I think he's just going to be the better fighter in this matchup, and I do trust him enough to stay safe and implement his rangy style game plan. So I am going to go with Randy Brown in this matchup. Let's move on. Now, I believe this is the first fight of the main card. Maybe Randy Brown was. Yeah, this is the second fight of the main card. Now, I know it may seem like my breakdowns are a little all over the place because I don't go like previous matchups, this, that, and the other. But I just kind of want to, I try not to base my opinion off of like recent matchups as much as I used to, because just because somebody looks like absolute shit in their last time in the octagon, they just could have had a bad camp. They could have had not felt good that day, whatever. They might not have been 100%. Regardless, you got to look at it as a whole and their abilities in general, as opposed to just being like, oh, he beat this guy, so he should be able to beat this guy. I don't really like doing it like that. But regardless, we're going to get into this next matchup. We have J.Almeida going up against Alexander Romanov, and I will be picking J.Almeida. I think this looks similar to the Curtis Blaydes fight, minus the finish in the second round. I think J.Almeida is going to learn from his mistake there and not just shoot sloppy takedowns. Hopefully he went back to camp and started working on his striking a little bit, so that he doesn't have to just only wrestle, even though he does a fantastic job doing so. He was absolutely ragdolling Curtis Blaydes in that first round. It was crazy to see him just throwing around this massive human being like Curtis Blaydes. Now, he does need to work on his control on the mat. His opponents are able to get back onto their feet, but we've seen Romanov get broken in his fights. We've seen him quit. Now, you could say that Almeida quit in his last fight, but he got knocked out by those hammer fists to the side of the head. You can see it. He got KO'd. So it's not like necessarily that he quit, but Romanov has shown that in his previous fights. And let fights get away from him. He has a similar style in the first round to Almeida. He comes in and he just absolutely ragdolls people, but the problem is he can't continue that. So this could end up being like an absolute slop fest where both of these guys are tired by like the 6th minute of the fight. But I can trust Almeida to be the aggressor in that first round. Romanov comes in looking different every single time he fights, I swear. It's either he could look like this picture or he can look absolutely, I don't want to say absolutely jacked, but not like this picture. So it's going to be interesting to see how weigh-ins go and how they look there. But I am going to pick Almeida here. I think he's going to ragdoll Romanov throughout the first round like he typically does. Hopefully he learned from his mistake against Curtis Blaydes and doesn't just like tire himself out too much and then throw a stupid sloppy takedown that ends up getting him knocked out. But I think he's going to wear on Romanov a lot. I think he's going to tire out Romanov, and even if Almeida does get tired as well, I think I can trust him to keep fighting as opposed to Romanov. Now, this could literally go either way. It just depends on what version of Romanov comes in, because we've seen multiple versions of him enter the octagon throughout his UFC career, but I am going to trust J.Almeida in this matchup to get it done. Next up, we have Kevin Holland going up against Oleksiejczuk, and Kevin Holland is going back up to middleweight. This guy got destroyed by MVP and moved back up to middleweight. So I don't know if he's thinking maybe the weight cut was too much and he's just not finding as much success. I don't know what the case is and why he went up, but I think he just I honestly just think he likes fighting. He likes money, that's for sure. And that's why the UFC loves him, because he steps in on short notice. He takes literally any fight that they give him. And I think they want to keep him around. So they want to give him bounce back fights. So obviously I don't think I actually don't know what their expectations were for that MVP fight, but Kevin Holland did not look good there. I'm hoping he bounces back here, and I think Oleksiejczuk is a perfect fight for him. Kevin Holland, even though McCall has the power to put people away, Kevin Holland has never shown to have chin issues. So he's gotten blasted before, and he doesn't go anywhere. So I haven't really done much thinking about this specific matchup. I kind of just always go with my boy Kevin Holland. I don't want to say this is biased because I do think just overall he is the better fighter. I think he's better on the feet. I think the only thing Oleksiejczuk has in this matchup is the power. A lot of people say he has underrated grappling and he's the better grappler, but Kevin Holland is also a very underrated grappler. He has 8 submission wins in his career. And Oleksiejczuk has 1. So I don't know. I swear I've heard people talk about the grappling of Oleksiejczuk, all this stuff, blah, blah. I think if the fight gets to the mat, Holland has the advantage. And I think Holland has the advantage on the feet in terms of skills as well. Like I said, I think the only thing going for Oleksiejczuk in this matchup is the power. Kevin Holland has never shown to have chin issues. And I think in that first round is going to be Oleksiejczuk's best opportunity because he will tire out, and I think Kevin Holland moves around well. He slips punches well. I think he finds his own success there, and then as the fight goes on, I think McCall ends up tiring out. Kevin Holland finds more and more success, and even if, like I said, if the fight ends up getting to the mat, I think Holland is the better fighter there. Call me crazy, but that's what I truly believe. So I'm going to take Kevin Holland in this matchup to get a victory going back up to the middleweight division. Now, another middleweight bout. I believe this is the co-main event of the evening. It's Sean Strickland going up against Paulo Costa. Now, this is a 5-round fight. And why that's important is because if this was a 3-rounder, I would pick Paulo Costa. Because I know early on he's going to be dangerous. He has the strength. He has the power. And he's going to land the more ooh-ah moments in the fight, especially early on. Like I said, he has the power. He's got the technique to land heavy. We saw that crazy spinning back kick against Robert Whittaker that almost put him away in Paulo Costa's last matchup. And we've actually seen Zaleski, who we just broke down a couple of fights ago, knock out Sean Strickland with that exact same kick. So a lot of people are like, I don't want to say a lot of people. I've heard people say, oh, Paulo Costa's going to land that kick, same as Zaleski, yada, 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 because Sean Strickland has a very parry-heavy style. And what I mean by that is instead of like slipping punches or like moving out of the way, he kind of like attacks the hands like that, or tries to push away kicks, push away strikes or punches rather. So it leaves him open to getting hit. So like, for example, somebody throws a right hand, comes from the left. It's mirrored on the camera, but he'll go like this to parry it away, and that leaves his whole side open here, which leaves him susceptible to getting hit. So that's why it's kind of interesting to see. Like, he does have that Philly shell where he like kind of rolls off of the punches and the strikes, but he is very parry heavy, and hopefully he fixes that in this matchup because Costa is going to find that shot, and hopefully Strickland ends up eating it, because there's going to be moments where Costa lands heavily on him. But I am going to pick Sean Strickland in this matchup because it's 5 rounds. I think over 5 rounds, we know Strickland can fight for like 20 rounds if he has to. He's going to be the one on the front foot. He's going to be more active as well. He's going to stick out that jab. I think he's going to frustrate Costa. He's going to be the fresher fighter throughout the 4th and 5th rounds. And if Costa's going to win, it's probably going to be a big shot early, and maybe put Strickland away. I just don't see that happening because even though Costa has that power, he hasn't knocked out anybody since Uriah Hall back in 2018. So it's been 6 years since he's ended up finishing somebody. Before that, Johnny Hendricks. Yeah, none of these names are too impressive in terms of finishing. Unanimous decision win over Yoel Romero is nice. In his last 5 fights, the guy's 2-3. And all his only wins are Romero and Rockhold. He's lost to Adesanya, Vettori, and Whittaker. Now, like I said, if this was a 3-round fight, I'm picking Paulo Costa. I think he lands heavy early and he has the more damaging strikes. But over the course of 5 rounds, I think Strickland's pressure, his volume, and his jab, I think they're just going to be overwhelm Paulo Costa. I think he'll be the fresher fighter as well. He has better cardio. So yeah, we'll see. One thing I haven't mentioned throughout this fight or throughout this breakdown is the new UFC gloves. They're 25% smaller from what I'm hearing, and that's going to play a big. That's going to play a big part in these breakdowns as well. So I can see this actually becoming an absolute shit show because none of us are taking into consideration the new gloves. We've never seen how fighters perform with the new gloves, how much more damage they inflict. So hopefully we end up doing well in terms of predictions, but it'll be nice to see how the new gloves change the way fighters react to getting hit. So regardless, Sean Strickland's going to be my pick over a course of 5 rounds. Let's move on to the main event. We got Islam Makhachev going up against Dustin the Diamond Poirier, and this one I honestly don't know what to do because obviously there's going to be things like the obvious pick should be Makhachev, right? Like you would think so because those style fighters typically give Poirier problems. Benoit Saint-Denis, he ended up knocking him out in the second round. I had Benoit Saint-Denis in that fight. In that first round, Benoit was able to get those takedowns, I believe. I'm going to double check before I sound like an absolute idiot. Benoit Saint-Denis landed 3 takedowns. 3 takedowns. So he struggles with people that can take him down. Well, I guess now I'm looking here. Michael Chandler took him down 3 times and he ended up losing. But yeah, if you look at If you look at Dustin Poirier's most recent losses, okay, Justin Gaethje, pure striker. Even though Gaethje has the ability to take the fight anywhere, he just wants to strike. Ended up knocking him out. I actually had Justin Gaethje in that fight as well. So now that I'm looking at this stuff, I haven't really picked I haven't picked Poirier in many of his most recent fights. Michael Chandler fight, I think I picked him in. Charles Oliveira, another ground specialist fighter, ended up losing there. His recent loss before that was Khabib Nurmagomedov, which Islam is like Khabib 2.0. He's arguably the better version of Khabib. So it's just hard because I really want to pick Poirier to win. I'm a huge Poirier fan. I think it'd be cool for him to solidify his career and end it. It doesn't even have to end after this fight. I think it'd be really cool to see him finally get gold because he's fought in the UFC for so long. He's one of the more exciting fighters, the more likable fighters, and it'd be really cool to see him get to the pinnacle. It's just I don't know if Islam is going to allow him to do that. I think I have heard some analysts say, which I do agree on, so I'm going to give them credit. I don't want people to think that I'm just copying everybody else. If somebody else brought something to my attention in their videos, I'm going to bring it up. So what I'm hearing is that people are thinking that Makhachev might get a little too excited about striking with Poirier because of recent matchups. So what I mean by that, Makhachev's last fight was against Volkanovski. Knocked him out in the first round with a head kick and then followed it up afterwards. Okay, we just saw Dustin Poirier get knocked out back in July of last year. I guess didn't just see, it's been almost a year. We saw him get knocked out by Gaethje with a head kick. So it'll be interesting to see if Islam gets kind of like a little too excited about his recent success on the feet. Poirier getting knocked out. Poirier will have a chance. He's a great counter striker. We've seen Makhachev get hurt. We've seen him get KO'd. Volkanovski ended up dropping him in the 4th or 5th round of their fight. In their first fight, I should say, because the second one only lasted 3 minutes. That broke my heart. Anyway, I really want to pick Poirier, but I don't want to be biased in my picks. Khabib is going to be in the corner of Makhachev. Just to keep you guys in the loop, if you haven't heard that, if you're making picks on this fight, if you're making bets on it, Khabib is going to be in the corner, and I think that plays a huge advantage here for Makhachev because Khabib has been in there with Poirier. He's been in there with Poirier. Khabib basically is playing UFC 5 with Islam in there. You might as well give him a controller. Islam is like a sponge. He listens to Khabib in that cage as well. Makhachev's style is just one that always gives Poirier problems. So, I don't know. You guys can probably tell I'm having this internal battle on wanting to pick Poirier so badly. But I am going to pick Islam Makhachev to retain his belt and finally defend it against a true lightweight. He's only defended his belt against Volkanovski twice. That's not his fault because Charles Oliveira pulled out of his last fight. But regardless, I'm going to be cheering for Dustin. If I ever wanted a pick to be incorrect, it is this one. I'm picking Islam. I don't think I'm going to bet on this fight. I think I'm just going to watch it and hope Dustin gets it done to see him get that belt. I think that'll be a monumental moment in UFC history, especially for UFC fans. So I will be cheering for Dustin, but ultimately I have to pick who I think is going to win, and that is Makhachev. All right. That's the whole breakdown. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more UFC content. Drop your comments down below on what you guys think of my picks, what you guys think of the matchups. If you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. I want to hear your guys' perspective on these fights, these events, whatever the case may be. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.